Okay, everyone. It is right at 8:05, so we are going to go ahead and start it off. Thank you all so much for joining tonight, our webinar with Mr. Michael Nyenhuis, our new CEO of UNICEF USA. It is going to be such an amazing time where you actually get to interact with our new CEO and ask him questions. We'll be able to hear from him directly. My name is Matt Grady. I am a senior at South Mecklenburg High School in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I serve on the UNICEF USA National Council as part of the recruitment team. So essentially my role is to constantly expand the UNICEF Clubs program into new people, new voices, and new communities, because obviously at UNICEF, every voice counts, which is why we are so excited to have you all here to hear from you and so that you can actually meet our new CEO. But before we get started, we're going to go over just a few guidelines and rules for the webinar. So just so you all know, all of your mics and cameras have been turned off already, so you do not need to be worrying about that. But of course, we're with UNICEF, so we want to build a safe and inclusive environment for everyone to voice their opinions. So we have a zero tolerance policy for any types of bullying, vulgar, or discriminatory language. And we do have the option to flag and remove participants if that happens, but I'm sure we won't have to do that tonight. And we have a chat function, which I want to encourage everyone to use here. When you go to your chat, make sure to chat to all panelists and attendees. That'll make sure that everyone can see your chat, not just us as the viewers. And when doing so, try not to share any private information. And anything that you do share in the chat does not represent UNICEF USA. But we do want to hear all of your thoughts, responses, anything you have to say, we'd love to hear it. But when we do get to our Q&A session, there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And that is how you will send in any questions that you have for the CEO, Mr. Nyenhuis. And so we want to encourage you, go ahead and start sending in questions. And as he is speaking, feel free to send in any that you all would want. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to my fellow council member, Sumaya.
Hi everyone, my name is Sumaya Alfath. I'm a student at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities and a member of UNICEF USA's Clubs National Council on the retention team. One of the many reasons why I love UNICEF is because it gives youth the opportunity to be an advocate and a voice for children around the world. With that being said, I have the pleasure of introducing UNICEF USA's new president and CEO, Michael Nyenhuis. Michael grew up trick-or-treating for UNICEF and has devoted his life and career to improving the health and well-being of the world's children and families. Prior to joining UNICEF USA, Michael was the president and CEO of AmeriCares for 6 years and the CEO of the global nonprofit MAP International for 13 years. A former journalist with a passion for global health, he previously served on USAID's Advisory Committee on Voluntary Foreign Aid and chaired the board of Integral Alliance, a global network of faith-based NGOs. He also currently serves on the board of Interaction, the largest coalition of US-based relief and development organizations working internationally, and the Leadership Council at Concordia, an organization and forum that promotes cross-sector partnerships for social impact. A Minnesota native, Michael holds a master's in business administration from Emory University and a Bachelor of Arts in Urban Studies and Communications from the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. A fun fact about Michael is that he has a pet dog named Izzy and who will be making an appearance. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll pass it over to you.
Great. I hope you can all hear me. What a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for that introduction. I am in my third week on the job here at UNICEF USA and couldn't be happier than to spend an evening with all of you. I'm just deeply committed to the youth voice and to your ability to make real change in our world. We see that all the time in areas like climate change and girls' education and in other ways, that when youth raise their voice, things happen. And so thank you for being a part of that. I do want to take a quick moment to make my introduction of Izzy, my golden retriever, because she's here with me and she tends to interrupt a lot of my Zoom calls, either because she wants something or wants to play or wants some food or something. So we'll just go meet Izzy first. And then, come here, Izzy. Here's the little puppy dog. Hello there, little Izzy. Say hello to everybody. Say hello. There she is. So just so you see her and you know that she's around in case she brings me a squeaky toy or something while we're talking. That's Izzy. I'm sure that this lockdown has all of you, trying to figure out the best way to manage through, and it's true for me and for my team at UNICEF USA as well. As I mentioned, I started my first job just 2.5 weeks ago. Our office in New York was shut by then, so I've got an introduction to the office and our staff and to our work, all by remote, by using Zoom and having conversations with our team around the country and also with the UNICEF colleagues all around the world. Very different environment. I know it is for you. And in the midst of that, thanks for taking your time to be with us. I'm going to give you just a quick history of mine, how I got to this role, and a couple of key moments along the way. And just tell you why I'm committed to the work of impacting kids around the world, as you are. And then I really just want to stop there and open it up for a conversation. I was really privileged a couple of months ago to have my very first UNICEF experience at an event hosted by the Harvard Undergraduate UNICEF Club in Cambridge. And I happened to be in Boston at the time. I was still working for AmeriCares then, but had already been appointed the new CEO at UNICEF USA and got the invitation to go speak to them. So had a great conversation. Again, I did a short talk and then we just had a lot of great Q&A. So I'm expecting that tonight. But I will always remember that my entry and opening into UNICEF was with a UNICEF club, student club. So all of you are very special to me then for that reason. So as Sumaya said, I am a Minnesotan, actually born in Wisconsin, grew up in Minnesota, lived for a long time in Florida and Georgia before coming to Connecticut, where I am tonight at my home in Stamford, Connecticut, just outside New York City. Started my career as a journalist, had an epiphany moment in my life on a reporting trip to Honduras, where I met a nurse who lived in a really poor community, rural community. She was from that community, had gone off to nursing school to gain some skills, then to go back to her community to serve in her own community. And I spent the day with her and was just incredibly impressed by the work that she was doing there. And I just had this moment where I thought, it's people like her that have a vision for their own communities. That's where change is going to happen. Like, who are we as outsiders to come up with solutions for the community? But she knows, so shouldn't we just get behind her and figure out how best to help her? And I just made a decision at that point that I was going to commit my life from then on to supporting people like that. So I left journalism. I found an NGO that did that kind of work, an organization based in Georgia called MAP International. Did a bunch of work for them, ended up being their CEO. Went on to AmeriCares, based in Connecticut for about 6 years. AmeriCares works in about 20 countries around the world doing global health work, as well as work here in the US across the country. And then got a call from a recruiter one day who said they were looking for a new CEO for UNICEF USA. And of course, just hearing the name UNICEF, caused me to sit up strongly and say, this has got to be something that's worth looking at. And of course, I knew UNICEF USA, and just felt a real privilege to go and have a chance to lead there. In my last overseas trip with AmeriCares, and just before I joined UNICEF USA, I went to Colombia, where we were operating clinics, about 10 primary care clinics along the Venezuelan border. These clinics are serving migrants and refugees from Venezuela who are crossing the border, fleeing their country because of the economic conditions there and the lack of health care, and are coming into Colombia. And while I was there, I met a mother who had 2 young children with her. And she had come from a community just across the border in Venezuela and had no health care left there and very little food. She told me for the past month before they came, her family ate nothing but plantains. That's all that they could find. So she knew that she couldn't make it there with her children. So they crossed the border into Colombia, migrated to a town about an hour from the border. Her husband was able to find a part-time job at a mechanic's place. They were eking out an existence. And I asked her what the difference was between her life in Venezuela and now in Colombia. She said, in Venezuela, we had to work for a month to have the dollars to feed our family for the day. At least here, we work for the day for the food we need that day. Now, for those of us, the whole idea of working today for food tonight is not really part of our reality. It is for some people in this country, but probably not for most of us. But for her, that was such a big difference to be able to know that she was able to feed her children every day. And I was watching her two children who were sort of playing around at the time and just thinking about what their future was like as refugees in a foreign country to them. And what their opportunities were going to be for schooling, for jobs at some point. When would they be able to go back to Venezuela? And as I sat there looking at these two children, I thought, that's really where we ought to invest our time. We really ought to invest our time and effort in creating a path for children to be able to have a better life and to thrive. And it occurred to me at that moment that I had accepted the job at UNICEF and I'd be coming there very shortly. And that's what our mission is, to help children like that have a path to a better life and a path to thrive. And that's why I'm here, and I know that's why you're here too. So thank you so much for being a part of this large global effort. There is no bigger place to have an impact for children around the globe than UNICEF. There are country programs in 190 countries. There are staff all over the place. There are young people like you in many, many, many countries who are standing up, asking, demanding their countries, their representatives for action to do something for children around the world. And you're a part of that much bigger puzzle. So, and we all play an important role. I was talking just today with one of our staff in Dallas who works with UNICEF clubs in her region. And she was telling me about a meeting that's happening tomorrow and that's could involve 10 students from schools in Frisco, Texas. And I don't know if any of you 10 are on the call tonight, but those 10, all young women, are going to be having a Zoom meeting with their congressman to advocate to that congressman for continued funding to UNICEF, for COVID funding, and for funding for the Global Vaccine Initiative as well. So here are 10 young women from Frisco, Texas, finding an opportunity to speak directly to their congressman to advocate for those three critical things. And that was really motivating for me. And I know there are examples like that among many of you in terms of what you are doing to move this whole agenda forward. So again, thank you for that. Thank you for being here tonight. And I look forward to a conversation for the rest of the time that we have together. So hosts, I'll send it back to you and you can send me the questions.
Awesome. Thank you for that keynote and giving us a little bit of a look into your background and reminding us of why we're all here. And that's something that I think we all should continue to go back to. So I want to encourage everyone to please keep using the Q&A function. If you go to the bottom or top of your screen, there's a Q&A button and you can send in your questions, but we're going to go ahead and start it off. So the first question is from Sarah, and she asks, what is your vision for UNICEF USA? And are there any particular programs, initiatives, or strategies you'll be focusing on implementing this year and in the future compared to the previous board leaders?
Yeah, great question. I'll say again that I'm 3.5 weeks into the job. So the job of really crafting what that vision is going to look like is part of what I'm working on now with the team and in my own understanding of the organization. But I will say this, you know, UNICEF has 35 national offices like ours, UNICEF USA, around the globe. So there's a UNICEF UK, There's UNICEF Germany, Japan, South Korea, Australia, lots of them that do similar work in their countries to rally people and resources to move UNICEF programs forward. And we play a very special role in that. We're the largest of all of those national offices, just in terms of the number of people involved, the amount of resource we raise, our influence into UNICEF generally. So one of my key objectives early is to really establish a strong and stronger relationship with the UNICEF global organization, with UNICEF field offices and country offices, to find out really where we can maximize our impact with the people and the resources and the ideas and the influence that we can bring to bear for that. So I spent a lot of time already, all in Zoom or Skype calls with UNICEF colleagues all around the globe, beginning to piece that together. How do we make a bigger impact as UNICEF backers and supporters here in the United States? The other thing I'm particularly interested in, I think, is our own work here in the United States. I think what the COVID crisis has really made clear is for us to be relevant to our audiences here in the United States, we have to be relevant at these times of crisis in our country, relevant to children here, as we're relevant to children around the world as well. So we're going to be taking a closer look at what we do today in our ability to impact children here in the United States at these moments, and what could we do more and better in the future. So those are a couple of things that are on my agenda.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. We have another question, and that's, how has your background helped shape the way you think about empowering children and young adults?
You know, I've, in my career, 25 years now doing relief and development work, I've been to 50 countries probably, and been in, you know, the most remote places and in urban slums and in capital cities, and, you know, had a taste of kind of every situation that kids are in around the world, in disaster settings and in just endemic poverty and all of that. And what I see there is that the hope for things getting better there is in, it rests with the children. The children who have an opportunity to get to school, that have an opportunity to have reasonable nutrition and food, that have a pathway forward. And I'll give you one real clear example from a trip to Kenya years ago. We were doing a clean water program with a school in a Maasai community. Maasai are the nomadic peoples of Kenya, of East Africa, and live in rural areas and traditionally, you know, very little economic resource there. And I went to this school to see what we had been doing there in the clean water and sanitation program that we were doing. And one of the things that the headmaster of the school told me was that since we had done this clean water program, started it a couple of years ago, and again, it included building the trains, bringing in a well and pump water, doing rain irrigation, rain capture off the roof to have plenty of water there, is that the school had become a magnet for more students. So parents were more likely in that place to send their kids, especially their girls, to school because they knew there was water, sanitation, and food there. And what the headmaster was saying was that he saw now there were, for the first time, kids that was leaving his primary school to leave the community to go to a boarding school for secondary school. And I just happened to meet one of those students, a young woman who was off at secondary school. She was probably 16, 17 years old at the time, roughly the age of my daughter at the time. So this felt all really relevant to me. She was telling me about her experience at her school and the people that she'd met from all over Kenya and actually from different parts of East Africa and the classes she was taking. And she started talking about some of the visions for her life, what she wanted to do for university, where she wanted to go. This was a girl from this village who happened to get to this primary school and whose parents saw an opportunity for her and let her go on to secondary school. On the same trip, I met another woman, same age, young woman, same age, a girl really, who had been married off to one of the elders in the community and never had a chance to go to school. When I met her, she was the third wife in the compound of one of the elders of the community, and she already had a baby that she had in her arms. And I thought about the pathway for these two kids. One stuck in a traditional model that had no pathway forward for her, and another given an opportunity through education, with clean water and sanitation and access to good food, and parents who decided that she had an opportunity to go further. And I just thought that's the difference. That's what we're working for, to give kids like that an opportunity to create a path for a different future. And that's motivated me ever since that experience, to make sure that we're doing whatever we can to create those pathways.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. And I think it reminds us, UNICEF always says every child deserves a childhood. And I think that speaks to how important education and sanitation and everything is to that. But you're speaking about how COVID-19 is sort of impacting what UNICEF is doing. And Lauren asked, how can we easily get involved in UNICEF during this time? And I think she may be speaking in reference to what's going on right now. Are there ways for us as young people to still be activated?
Yeah. Well, again, I just want to just raise again the example of that group of students from Frisco, Texas, who are really doing direct advocacy with their political leaders right now, which I think is really important. I think we have another program. I don't know how much you know about it, called Kid Power here in the U.S. And it's a program that's targeted toward teachers in schools that give them some activities to do with students in their classrooms to have the kids be active for 5 minutes of sort of physical activity, and in this activity they get points and sort of create with those points unlock our ability then to distribute therapeutic food in malnourished countries around the world. So it's a game, but you're getting an outcome from it. Well, we've made that program, Kid Power, available for parents who have kids at home now with some curriculum from school, but not enough to do. And they can sign up for this at unicefkidpower.org/parents. And one of the things you could do is to spread the word about that. Let's see if we can get parents who are struggling with what to do, especially with their younger kids at home, to keep them active at this time that they're out of school, and get more of them engaged with UNICEF through our Kid Power program. That'd be one thing you could do.
Thank you, Michael. That's so awesome. We have another question, and that is, what do your day-to-day responsibilities look like so far?
Well, I would say in the first now 2.5 weeks that I've been on the job, a lot of it has just been learning the organization. So I've had conversations with many of our staff, many of our teams, our regional offices around the world, my board members, the directors of UNICEF, UNICEF Programming Division, some of my colleagues at UNICEF Canada, UK, Portugal, places like that, just really trying to learn the organization well. So my duties right now are very different than they will be once I'm really fully up to speed. But typically when you come into an organization like this as a new leader, you sort of have a 90-day plan to get to know the organization well and figure out what you want to build in terms of a strategy going forward. And so I'm sort of right in the early part still of that 90 days. But I laid out several objectives for me in those first 90 days, and I shared this with the staff. And the first one was to manage the organization carefully through the COVID crisis. So not only are we active in doing things about COVID, but we're also dealing with the potential financial implications on our own organization, right? We're now in an economy that's collapsing, and our revenues are driven by donations from individuals, foundations, and corporations that want to support the work that we do around the world. Well, a lot of those corporations and a lot of those people are hurting right now, and so what does that mean for our financial picture going forward? So there's a lot of management right now of the current crisis and thinking about our budgets going forward and things like that. That's not actually, what I signed up to do, because when I took the job in early January, when I accepted the job in early January, COVID existed in China, and maybe it was starting to leak out in a few other places, but it was not a big deal yet. So this is a very different thing. But so manage carefully through the COVID crisis. So I spent a lot of time on that. Secondly is just sort of get to know the organization. That's all the meetings I'm having. I'm literally on Zoom meetings about 9 hours a day, just with different teams and groups and individuals. Third, then, is based on what I'm learning to begin to build the strategy, a 3-year strategy that will guide our work going forward. And that is, a piece that I take real seriously. And I have a meeting with our board of directors as a strategic planning committee. I have an early meeting with them in a couple of weeks to share some early ideas about that. And then coming out of that, we'll more fully develop our strategy for the next 3 years. And then the fourth thing in my 90 days is to really get to know UNICEF itself and to look at the places where we have strong relationships and those places where the relationships aren't as strong that I need to work on, and connect the two organizations together extremely well. So those are some of my priorities over this first 90-day period. It's interesting, you could read literature about new leaders coming into organizations, and there's a lot of you can find books that are called like the first 90 days that give examples of what a new leader might do in those first 90 days. So there's kind of a roadmap of what to do. And I've done this before because this is my third opportunity to lead an organization. And so I have some history and track record of what works in terms of getting to know the organization and building that strategy.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it sounds like you have a really solid plan, at least for the next 90 days, and then you can start working on the rest of your initiatives. But what made you initially want to be a new CEO? Rick asks.
Yeah, well, I had been, I was the CEO at AmeriCares for 6+ years, and I don't really know what the right tenure is for a CEO. There's a lot of things that you might read that say sort of 7 to 10 years is a good window for a CEO to lead an organization. It's long enough to make a real difference in an organization, but it's not too long that that your ideas maybe get a little stale, or that the organization needs a sort of a refresh anyway. And so I was at that 6-year mark, which is a little bit early, actually, probably to leave AmeriCares, but we'd done really good work there, and the organization was in very good shape, and I had a successor sort of in the wings, ready to go if I decided to go do something else. And I wasn't really looking for another job at that point. Again, it was a little bit early. I probably would have liked to have stayed there another couple of years to solidify everything I had put in place at AmeriCares. But again, when you get a phone call from a recruiter who says, "Hey, might you be interested to lead UNICEF USA?" You don't hang up the phone. You take the phone call and you listen to it and start looking at the opportunity. And I just felt it was one of these kind of once in a lifetime opportunities you don't want to pass up. And again, I felt really good about the position AmeriCares was in, and my second in command there was ready to take over. And in fact, the board of directors, which makes the decision about who will be the CEO, agreed with me that she was ready to take over, and they appointed her the new CEO. Interestingly, she had worked for UNICEF USA for about a decade earlier in her career. So we have a little bit of switching around the circle a little here. But so I feel really good about AmeriCares and leaving it in good hands. And again, just what an incredible opportunity. Let me just say this to any of you. If at some point in your career, you get a phone call from a recruiter who wants to know whether you might be interested in the job of CEO of UNICEF USA, I guarantee you'll take the call and you'll probably take the job.
Thank you, Michael. Well, we're so happy that you've decided to join UNICEF USA. We have another question that's, What's your vision for the UNICEF High School and College Clubs program, and are there any goals you hope to accomplish with the program?
Yeah, thanks. A great question. I am a big proponent and champion of our clubs program. I would like to see it expand even further. More high schools, more colleges and universities, more kids in the clubs that we have, more action on their part to help raise the voice for children in this country. I think there's just such a nice pipeline between kids who maybe were introduced to UNICEF through trick or treat, early on, who have an opportunity to connect to it in high school, who can move into universities and keep that connection to us, who graduate from there and can become part of our next gen group, next generation group, which is sort of young professionals who are connected to us as well, who can continue with their support and engagement with us throughout their lives. So I think that, to me, the foundation of that is our clubs program. And I hope we can, I will assure you, in the strategy that I put forward for the organization, significant expansion of the clubs program will be a part of that, because I feel really strongly about the power of the collective action and voice of young people to really make a difference. And my first experience, my only in-person experience with this so far was my speaking to the Harvard Club a couple of months ago. And when you get to meet some of you face to face and hear the passion and the commitment to this work in the midst of very busy academic schedules and all of that, it's just really inspiring for the rest of us. So I'm with you all the way to keep this going and grow it bigger.
Yeah, and that's amazing to hear. And I'm sure everyone on the call is glad to hear that, and I certainly am. Someone said, it's amazing how you became a CEO from journalism. Did you ever get formal education in business, or did you just have to jump right in?
Yeah, well, I sort of jumped right in first. I literally went from journalism to my first role at the NGO, MAP International Medical Assistance Programs, was running communication. So I took my journalism skills and I brought it into this NGO and I ran the communication side. And then, I don't know, sometimes you're in the right place at the right time. You just find yourself in your calling, right? The thing you were called to do. And I think this happened to me there. And I just kept getting more responsibility, different leadership roles up the chain until I had the opportunity to be the CEO there. When I became the CEO there, I realized that while this is a not-for-profit that I run now, and it's sort of mission-driven, not with a financial bottom line, although we have to have a financial bottom line, but the mission is really about impact, that I better figure out how to run a business. So I did go back to business school, and I got an MBA at Emory University in Atlanta, so that I had the formal business training to manage that. And I think that was really helpful. It was a good move on my part and really helpful in my understanding of how to really see these organizations as businesses as well as mission-driven organizations. But I think sometimes you just find yourself in the right place and the right things happen to put you in these spots. I will say, my journalism skills still, I still think at heart I'm a journalist, so I love to write and communicate. I remember once when I was a journalist, my father said something to me sort of cynical about journalists. He said, you journalists are dangerous. He said, you know a little bit about a lot of things, but you don't know much about anything. And there's some real truth to that. I actually said to him, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Because there's some truth to that, because journalists are not subject matter experts in probably any of the things that they report on typically. But the skill that they learn is how to ferret out the information they need to explain what's happening in whatever subject that they're writing about. So they know what they don't know. They know how to find experts. They know how to ask questions. They know how to assimilate information They know how to try to make sense of it and be able to articulate it in a way that is clear. And actually, my job as a CEO is not much different than that. You know, I'm not the expert in fundraising. I'm not the expert in marketing. I'm not the expert in advocacy. I'm not the expert in finance. I'm not the expert in IT. I'm not the expert in HR. But I have people who are experts in all of these things that work for me. And my job really is to encourage them to do great work, to know what questions to ask them, to be skeptical enough of some of the answers, to push a little bit deeper, to be able to synthesize all of that together to make it into a coherent whole. And so I do think some of the journalism skills actually are pretty cross-cutting in the kind of role that I play today.
That's awesome. Thank you. So we have another question from one of our National Council members, and that's, what messages do you have for the world's children during this time of global crisis?
Yeah. Boy, it's a hard one, isn't it? You know, what I want to be able to say is be patient. You know, this, the situation we're in right now will ease, and life will get back to some state of normalcy. But it's very difficult to ask children to be patient in the midst of a crisis. So, you know, to find ways to keep learning is probably the big message I would have. To, you know, to be a self-learner, to take the curriculum that you have from schools, and UNICEF, you know, is both providing curriculum in digital formats for people who can access that, but in some of the poorer countries, they've been working with television and radio to be able to broadcast curriculum. In a lot of the, you know, the poorest places, radio is the real means there, and they're using radio to get the school systems to be able to broadcast curriculum for kids. And you can imagine how hard this is for a kid to concentrate on that, but to be able to take advantage as much as possible of that, while at the same time figuring out how to be a self-learner. Because in my example back from Kenya with the two girls I talked about in the two different paths, you know, education is the big game changer. So somehow we got to help the children stay focused on learning, even in the midst of this.
Thank you. And that's interesting and nice to know that UNICEF is taking an active response to this crisis, as well as to every crisis. So Diana asks, my question is in relation to COVID-19. What do you think global leadership will look like post-COVID-19?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. One of two things I think is going to happen. One is the whole movement we've been seeing over the past few years about closing borders is either going to accelerate because people are going to be increasingly concerned about how these pandemics can spread and when the next one might come. And so we might have more nationalism rise up. We might have more closed borders. We might have less migration as a result of all of that. I think, you know, there's a risk that that becomes a reaction to the current situation, when in reality, although this pandemic did spread globally through travel and all of that, you know, we're so much stronger as a global community when we're closely tied and networked together, when we can support one another. So the collective response to things matters. International travel, trade, education matters for what we're trying to build in the world. And so my hope is that, you know, political leadership will resist the temptation to close up and circle the wagons around their own countries, that they'll resist that temptation and they'll recognize the strength and power of approaching problems together. But I think we're going to have to see which one of those two paths, you know, the world political leaders really walk.
Thank you. And we have another question, As volunteers of UNICEF Unite, what is the most valuable asset we can carry within ourselves in order to have the greatest impact on children all around the world?
Confidence. Confidence in your ideas, confidence in your voice, confidence in your ability to make change, confidence so that you don't shrink back from difficult moments or arguments against you or roadblocks that are thrown up in front of you, that you just build confidence that it's you and your generation that are going to make the next major changes in the world, and we need you there. So, step forward, make sure your ideas are heard, find those opportunities to collectively raise your voice, and just keep pushing. So confidence.
Yeah, and that's a great message, especially during this time. And you're speaking in reference, of course, you're taking over UNICEF USA, but someone asked, how much do you know about UNICEF Unite, and what excites you about it?
What excites me about UNICEF Unite is sort of the idea of a movement, right? So UNICEF Unite encompasses lots of different volunteers and people committed to this kind of mission who are sort of rallied around us, and then we're sort of rallied with them. And I love this idea of a movement of people from all walks of life and all ages who are working together to have a collective voice to make change. So that's the thing that excites me the most, is the more we can act together, that we can raise our voice together across all 50 states, high school, college, next gen, older folks like me, that can really work together. When we show the strength of our diversity and the power of our common voice in the midst of that, I think we can really make a difference, and that gets me excited.
I definitely agree with that. And we have another question. Can you tell us about a time you failed, and what did you learn about your failure?
Yeah, geez, too many, too many times. Yeah, I'll give you an example. This is my work at AmeriCares. We were really active in the Ebola crisis in West Africa, responding in Liberia primarily. We actually ran and operated one of the Ebola treatment units that was set up to deal, specifically with Ebola patients. So we were very active there. And after, but the whole thing happened really fast. You had to move really quickly. It was, a real emergency. Afterwards, we had such good connections in the country, we decided to stay there and open up a country office and continue to work with the Ministry of Health on strengthening rural and local health centers to help them strengthen their capacity to serve their patients better. And we had opportunities there quickly. And so we moved fast, and we put resource into the country and to do program work as fast as we could, training midwives, things like that. But we were not careful with the way we set up the infrastructure of our office there, specifically around the issue of financial controls. We didn't have good HR systems in place either. We hired a country director there who turned out to be a crook because we had poor financial controls, actually stole money from us, which is really stealing from the poorest people in his own country, because that's where we were going to work. And it took us about 9 months before we realized what was happening. And I had been the one sort of pushing for us to go fast because the need was there. Go fast. Let's move quickly. We got to accomplish that need. And in hindsight, I should have taken more time to say, we have to be sure that we have the infrastructure built correctly before we go too fast. So it's this balance of how fast you can go and how confident and secure you can be in the infrastructure you have. And our work there stopped immediately for too long a time when we uncovered this problem. and had to deal with the legal implications of all of it. So, part of the lesson for me there is we're in a, and I should know this because I went to business school, but when you're, the work we do, meeting people in crisis and meeting people in need, it just seems like that's paramount to anything. Just rush in and help, rush in and do it right then. But we have to remember that, we're running a business too, and it has to operate like one. And we have to sometimes slow down a little bit in order to make sure that we do things the right way if we want things to be sustainable.
Yeah, and that's speaking of doing things in the right way. I know you laid out those 4 initiatives you wanted to get done in your first 90 days, and someone asked, what are the most beneficial ways that we can physically help you to push your plans and initiatives going forward, and to optimize their effect from where we are located?
Yeah. Well, listen, I would love to hear from many of you, and I don't know how we can set this up in sort of a structured way to get your thoughts and ideas about and your dreams and hopes for UNICEF USA and for UNICEF Global more broadly. What would you like to see happen? What issues would you like to see tackled? What would you like to see happen with UNICEF Unite and with the student clubs? What are your best ideas there? I'm speaking now, I guess, to my staff that are on this call. Let's figure out a way to capture that input and those ideas, because I would really love to have them. And frankly, I would love to have some of that information, some of your ideas and dreams and hopes and thoughts pretty quickly, because again, my mind is beginning to formulate what this strategy is going to look like for the next 3 years. And if it can be influenced by your voice, by your ideas, I would love that. So let's figure out a way, my staff here, to capture some of that and get it to me while my brain is still mulling through what that strategy ought to look like.
Thank you. What words of encouragement would you like to give for everyone on this call?
One word is resilience, right? This is a moment where your resilience as students, your resilience as members of families, your resilience in the midst of stress and struggle that might be in your home because everyone's collapsed into one place, and maybe financial considerations for some of you. This is a time where the resilience we have to make it through crisis and get to the other side is going to be tested. And I hope that you will find the places, the people, the things that will help you strengthen your resilience at this moment. Whether it's your peers, your parents, therapists, counselors, teachers, whatever you need to make sure you have the resilience to make it through this very unusual and uncertain time until we get back to something that is more normal, we hope, because we need you. We need you we need you working, full throttle to build the lives you want and build the world you want. So yeah, be resilient.
Yeah, and resilience is a perfect message for everyone on the call here, especially during this time. Jasmine asks, what are the most important skills or lessons that you've acquired, and how do you plan to integrate these into UNICEF?
Maybe from my experience over the past 2 decades, traveling to 50 different countries, interacting with people of every type and language and experience, to the highest political figures and the wealthiest people, to the people in the poorest communities around our globe. I've just come to appreciate that everybody's ideas and opinions matter, that the collection of thoughts and ideas from the broadest group of people you can find is where you're going to find the best solutions. And I certainly am going to bring that to my work here at UNICEF, because we have this amazing array of people around us in our country, from youth voices to older, from the kids that we have in our Kid Power program to political leaders we know, and then globally connected to all of the UNICEF around the world in every country. So just be able to gather the best of those ideas, I think, is what I'll take with me.
Yeah, that's an amazing message. And I think we are right at 8:55, so we are going to go ahead and end there. But for anyone who has questions, we have captured all of the questions you are asking. And when you log off of this webinar, there will be a survey that has a section to enter any comments and questions. And we'd love to hear, what are your visions and dreams for UNICEF USA? And we can try and pass those on to our new CEO so he can begin formulating his plan for UNICEF USA. But we want to thank you so much for coming on our webinar. Mr. Nyenhuis, it was so enlightening and interesting to hear from you and be able to ask you questions. And I think we are going to go ahead and sign off. But thank you all for coming and being able to speak directly with our new CEO.
Thanks, everyone, and for everything you're doing, and hang in there. The world will turn back to normal at some point.
That's a great message. Thank you all.